Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker-Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process and for authors to learn valuable tips on producing and marketing your audiobooks. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Hello, thanks for joining me today to talk about whether your book that may have a lot of dialogue in it actually needs one narrator or possibly more than one narrator. This is a question that I get quite frequently, especially when a manuscript is very dialogue heavy. There is the idea that we would need to hear it in more than one voice. So let's talk about that. The style of audiobook that is still the dominant, the most common style is a single narrator. And there are a lot of good reasons for that. One is that when we read a story, we're actually kind of creating those voices in our heads, but it's almost like we are the narrator in our own minds. Another really good reason for that single narrator dominant style is that it is far less expensive than having multiple narrators interweaving the dialogue and a narrator. It's just a much more complex process. That's not to say that it's not an awesome process. It certainly is. And it's doing full cast projects is certainly one of my personal favorite types of projects. But most manuscripts are not really suited to full cast projects. And just to define again what I mean by full cast is when you have all that dialogue is narrated by distinct voices. It's often the case that there will be one narrator doing multiple roles, like maybe one main role and several small roles, or just lots of the smaller characters. That's certainly true. But typically then it's the dialogue that is being carried by these different voices, and then there's usually a narrative voice as well. Now, digging into this question of whether your particular manuscript might be one that needs more voices or not, let's go a little deeper here. If you have a lot of dialogue and you're thinking, it's mostly these 2 characters and I should have this other voice that is doing that dialogue, here's the thing that I want you to think about initially. Even if it is predominantly 2 characters, you need to stop and think also, what other voices are in dialogue? You may not be thinking about them initially, but if you have many other secondary voices, small characters, one-liners here and there, then in order for your listeners to have a kind of consistent listening experience, you really should have all those other little one-liners also handled by different voices. Now, if you have like 2 main characters and you don't really want to dilute their main characters by having those same actors read these other lines, and of course they would be doing them, with an attempt to make them sound different, right? But if you don't want to have that happen, that sort of dilution of their voices from their main character roles, then you really start to escalate the scope of the project. And if it is heavily 2 voices, and then there's all these just some smaller voices here and there, you can end up with a kind of imbalanced feel to the overall experience. The other thing I want to say about this voice differentiation of doing different roles, many of us can actually tell when it's the same actor doing multiple roles. Now, that's not to say that the voices aren't distinct. They are. But, we each have a kind of vocal quality about us that makes it, recognizable. And that's okay. I'm not suggesting that it's not okay to double up roles. What I am saying is that when you have these dominant main characters, it is generally better not to then also have those same actors reading the smaller lines. Coming back to that single narrator approach, again, the most typical approach, what you want to do is you want to cast the project with a narrator who's really good at that differentiation of character voices. As I just mentioned, it's not that we're going to think, oh, that's a whole other actor. No, it's fine to have their voice. But what we want to know is when we're listening to a dialogue scene and one person speaks and then another person speaks, another character, we want to be able to know that, oh, yeah, that's that character. When I hear a line spoken that way, with that quality of voice or that tempo or that, maybe it's a certain grittiness of voice or maybe it's a certain breathiness of voice, whatever the quality is, whatever the actor is doing to create those distinctions, that's what you want to find when you're casting the project. When your book is dialogue heavy, and especially if you have multiple people within a scene, within a conversation, it is really helpful and a great idea to have a narrator who is skilled with that kind of vocal distinction. So in summary, what I wanted to convey today is that typically, even if your book has a lot of dialogue, most often you're going to still want a single narrator. A full cast production is certainly an option, and depending on the manuscript and what the story and the content and the style call for, that's something that certainly we could talk about. Either way, I highly recommend having someone helping you with the casting process. At Pro Audio Voices, we have a casting director who handles that very process overall. And I will say that it is a skill to understand, to be able to hear, to recognize when an actor is going to be able to handle well that kind of many-voiced conversation in a text. And also, with full cast projects, to be able to find the voices that are going to have the kind of variety that is really helpful to the listener for those kinds of projects. I'm going to wrap it up for today and just, again, extend the invitation. If you have a project that has a lot of dialogue, if you're uncertain about which way to go, please reach out to us. We'd love to talk with you about the project and help you figure out what's going to be the best path for you. Thanks again for joining me today. If there's a topic that you have not heard or would like to hear more about on our podcast, please reach out to us at proaudiovoices.com. I'd love to address any questions that you may have and thereby hopefully help more of you out there who are working on audiobook production, marketing, distribution. Again, thanks for being with me. Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.